Hi everybody, my name is Hester, and for almost 16 years now, I've had the privilege of leading the way in what's called CPR, or Celebrate Pastors in Recovery. CPR is just simply 12-step studies, Celebrate Recovery 12-step studies for those who are in vocational ministry, as well as groups for their spouses also. As you know, the need right now for a safe place like CPR, a safe place for help and for hope and for healing in Christ for those in ministry is enormous. And so I am delighted that you are pursuing the possibility of leading a CPR group or helping lead a CPR group. And right now, it's a privilege to introduce to you the person who is going to give you some fabulous training for that process. Her name is Julie Heritage. Julie has been serving now as our women's ministry leader for Celebrate Recovery at our church, we've had Celebrate Recovery now for some 22 years. And Julie does an outstanding job serving our church, and she does a tremendous job leading you through this process of training for how to lead a CPR step study. So let's listen to Julie Heritage. Here's Julie.
Hello, everyone. I am a follower of Jesus, and I struggle with selfishness and fear and pride, and my name's Julie. I am the ministry leader at Southern Hills in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and while I am in full-time ministry, I'm not a pastor. However, I do train lots of leaders on how to lead a step study. So I am going to train specifically you on how to lead a CPR step study, a step study for pastors in recovery. And we are so grateful that you have said yes to leading pastors in recovery. And so I'm going to do a very quick training. Our trainings in person are usually 90 minutes long. So I'm going to do a really try and do a tight job of getting this in less than half an hour. So I want to start off by saying that there's lots that we're going to cover in this training. I first want you to go grab a notebook. Grab a notebook because you will take lots of notes. I will also provide, I'm going to post that right now in the chat. I'm going to post a link. So you should see it there, a link to a Google Doc of some of our notes. So I encourage you to do 3 things before I get started. If you want to pause this video and click on that link and print off my notes, you can go through them with us. So that might be helpful for you, or you can just look at it on the computer as we go through it. Secondly, I want you to grab, I'm going to specifically talk about book 2. There's some things specifically in book 2 of a step study that are different than books 1, 3, and 4. So I'm going to highlight those, and I'd like you to have book 2 handy when I talk about those. And then the other thing is to get a notebook. So you can take extra notes, because at the end, after we talk about the stuff on the sheet that you've got printed there, we're going to talk about some what ifs. What if this happens? What if this happens? And we're not going to write all that out for you. So I want you to consider taking notes on those things for yourself. So please pause this if you need, get those 3 things handy, and then join us, and we'll continue our training. So I wanted to tell you that although there are a lot of details to leading a step study is way, way much more than just a perfect process. It's not just about the process. And you know this, leading ministry is about people. The people element is so much more important than the process. Having a bad process can be distracting, but not connecting and investing properly with the people is even more distracting. So I want to start off, and you'll see this in the notes, that leading a step study has ministry elements and meeting elements. So I want to identify those separately. And I've got 5 things listed as things that are important for you to recognize and highlight as ministry elements as you are leading a CPR step study. First is that it is really, really important that you connect with everyone who is signing up for your step study. So even from the very beginning, as people are registering for your step study, signing up, agreeing to do that, begin the connection then. You remember what it was like when you took your first, maybe you've only had one, but when you took your first CPR study, how frightening that can be. And so connecting, having a leader connect with you and giving you some reassurances and kind of holding your hand a little bit as you begin the step study can be invaluable. And so be sure to connect with them, especially right when they're signing up. Also make sure that they are eligible to participate in a CPR study. I will point you to the CR National page, which is cprpastors.com, and they have some specific language on that webpage as to who is eligible, men and women, to participate in CPR studies. So I will direct you to that, but be sure and verify that everyone who has signed up for your group is eligible to participate. Be sure to connect with your participants throughout the study because this isn't just a rhythmic thing. These are actual people with hard things. And so connect with them, stay in touch with them. If someone has a need or had an especially difficult week that you heard about in group, reach out to them during the week as the leader. So that can be really, really important to keeping them engaged, keeping them plugged in. If someone is considering dropping, you staying connected with them can make all the difference. Also listening and engaging with them purposefully during their sharing. And this means eye contact. And so sometimes it's easy to look down or to be a little distracted when someone's sharing because they're probably looking down at their paper, reading their answers. But it can mean so much to them when they look up and they see a leader looking right at them when they are sharing. So be sure to set the example for your group and model eye contact for them. And that is an awesome way to connect with them. And then, like I said, individually, as they may need you during the study, be sure to connect one-on-one with them as needed. So that's the first thing, connect, connect, connect. I've written it 3 times on my own notes because it's the most important thing, the number one thing. The other ones are to prepare. We know what it looks like when someone is winging it, and that is not cool, and you can really tell. And so be sure to come prepared. And I don't mean just the first time, because I'm sure you'll come prepared the first class, but even the 24th class, come prepared. Let your preparation be shown and be known. If you are leading with a co-leader, hopefully you are, please meet with your co-leader in advance. Prepare who is going to lead what section, get on the same page with them about the process that you're going to use for the group. And I recommend having a sheet that you go through, just a general sheet with the rhythm of the time, what you're going to do first, what you're going to do second, introductions and guidelines and whatever you're going to do. So you're always prepared and always doing exactly the same thing every single time. It'll also give you a page to write down in advance any announcements you want to give or something like that. So if you have a sheet that you are working from, every single lesson you lead through, you will always show and appear prepared. So I encourage you to make one of those for yourself and use one of those. Another one is prayer. I cannot remind you enough how valuable prayer is. So be sure and be bathing your group and your co-leader and yourself in prayer. Pray, pray, pray. It can make all the difference. In fact, I encourage you to maybe meet in advance, maybe a few, like 30 minutes or 15, 20 minutes, something in advance of the rest of the group jumping on, and pray with your co-leader over the group if you have time to do that. So think through that. Definitely add prayer as your element as you go along in your group. Modeling for others. So modeling healthy recovery is such an important piece of our step study of a recovery group. You are showing them what healthy recovery looks like. And so this looks like being the first ones to arrive to the group. You don't want everyone else showing up and you're in the middle or at the end or coming in at the last second. Model that for them, be the first ones to arrive. Respect your co-leader during the group. If you have any kind of difference that you're feeling about your co-leader or something you want to ask them about that privately. Don't ask them about that in front of everyone. Model that unity in front of your group. Keep the exact same guidelines with your group that you are asking them to keep, you are a participant just like them in addition to leading them. So be sure you are modeling how the guidelines are to be kept. Do not take any shortcuts for yourself, and answer your own questions as thoroughly and as transparently as possible. Set the example. You are not just leading them. Like I said, this is your step study too. And if you are guarded, they will be able to tell. And the more transparent you are, the more transparent they will feel safe being. So model for them as the leader. The fifth thing I want to mention as a ministry element is to protect your group. It is important as the leader that you protect your group. Protect the safety of your group. And this means that if there are issues that arise, do not procrastinate addressing them. It is important for you to protect your group. Enforce the guidelines, even when it's hard, even when it's uncomfortable, enforce them. We will talk about that a little bit later as to some examples of how to enforce them. Protect your group by avoiding triggering conversations and political conversations. Those have no place in our 12-step studies, and we will talk about that a little bit more in a few minutes, but avoid conversations that veer into things that trigger people or are distracting for the group. That is the way you can really protect the group. And then ask for guidance. You are not alone in leading your group. So if you have a question or an issue that's arising and you're not sure how to handle it, pray. Talk to your co-leader if you have one, and then invite advice from another leader that you know who has led CPR groups before to get guidance on the best way to handle an issue. You are not alone, so don't try and run it alone. So protect your group by using all of those resources. So that is what I want to highlight on the ministry elements, and the rest of it really doesn't matter if you don't get the beginning part right. If you don't get those things right, then the rest of it's hard. So I want to highlight those first. Next, I want to talk about some of the details of the meeting elements. These are the nuts and bolts of the actual meeting. And so you probably are familiar with most of these. You've been through a step study, a CPR step study before, but I want to go through them with you so you remember, because the leader was doing it. So maybe you weren't really paying attention exactly what they were doing. So there are some required things that every step study must have, and there's some optional things. So I want to cover those. The required things is we start on time. We respect people's time, and as leaders we model that, and so we start on time. It's important for you to always begin exactly on time. Begin every meeting with prayer. That is very, very important. Take attendance for yourself and your group. If you have some sort of attendance sheet, or maybe it's a digital format or something, however you choose to take attendance, keep track of who is coming to your group. If you're not keeping track, it will be hard for you to connect when people miss and remember when they missed and how long ago that was. We juggle a lot, so you're not going to remember who was it, what week people were at. So keep track of who was when, so that will help you to connect with them. Number 4 is introductions. So we always lead the group through the introductions, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. But the next thing we do in groups is we always read either the 8 principles or the 12 steps. And I always tell my leaders that I like to alternate between the 8 principles and the 12 steps. That way they hear them both. So one week we do the 8 principles, and one week we do the 12 steps. So that is a great thing to do. Read those, and those are in the participant guides at the front. And then the next one is to read the group guidelines. And if you are doing Zoom groups, which CPR groups usually are on Zoom, there are 3 additional Zoom guidelines. And so you can find that at celebraterecovery.com. I have also posted a link to the Zoom guidelines in the Google page that you can see linked on this training. So if you click on that, you'll see all the links I'm referencing. But definitely have your group read all of the 8, if you're doing Zoom groups, the 8 guidelines. There's a short version and the long version if you include all of the language. So read the guidelines. And then I've put open sharing in big all caps, because this is one thing that's different in a CPR group that we don't have in traditional groups. We do not include open times of sharing in traditional step studies, but in CPR groups we do, because our pastors don't go to open share because it's not safe most of the time for them. And so we include a time of open sharing at the beginning of our CPR group. So be sure and include a safe, not a rambling time, but a structured, healthy time of open sharing for each of the people in your group to share victories, struggles, how they're doing, how their week was. And so guide that as a leader, encourage them to continue keeping the guidelines so everyone has an opportunity to share. I and me statements, all those things are kept during the open sharing, but we want our pastors to have a time to openly share what's going on in their week in addition to what is being asked in the curriculum. So that's one thing we add in our step study for CPR groups only. Number 8 is when you're ready to go into the lesson, you always read the lesson acrostic. So that is in the participant guide. So you'll go to lesson 1, denial, and you'll read through and take turns in your group reading through the acrostic. That is the curriculum that goes along with the denial lesson. So please do not overlook that. It is a required piece of all of our step studies. Number 9, you go into your group sharing time. And then at the very end, you end with announcements, any announcements you have, and then you pray and dismiss. So those meeting elements, the required ones, you will have at every single meeting that you have. The optional ones, which you can include if you have time and desire, is you can include a worship song at the front. So maybe you play a YouTube song just to get everyone in a worshipful space for 3 or 4 minutes, whatever the length of the song is, for everyone to just kind of listen to it and get their heart in a space. That might be helpful. Maybe you have an intentional time of prayer requests. You may not need that with the open sharing. If people are sharing things that they need prayer for during that time, you may not need an additional time to share prayer requests, but you might, especially if your group is smaller and you have the extra time. Also, as the leader, if you have experience or any insights to share on a specific lesson in your life, you feel free to teach or share, lean into the lesson that you're having that day. And that is optional for you to share any guidance or insights or direction that God gives you on that lesson topic. So you can give them any help on that topic that God may have given you. So those things are optional regarding the meeting time. So the next thing I want to go to is the very, very first week that you meet. It will be an introductory week, and it will be a little different than all your other regular weeks. So I want to cover what we talk about in the introductory week. So in that first week, you will teach everyone in your group how to introduce themselves. And maybe you forgot how you were actually taught. Maybe you've introduced yourself so many times you forget or forgotten how to teach someone to do that. So we just teach people that it's in 3 pieces. The first piece is what your relationship with God is. And so I say I'm a follower of Jesus. The second is whatever your struggle is. And this is not a time for a person's testimony, but we just tell them to give me 2 or 3 words or 1 word, whatever your primary struggle is. Sometimes it can change depending on the situation or the time in your life, but the second thing is your struggle. And the last one is your first name. So that everyone in the group can say, hi, so-and-so, glad you're here. So my introduction is, I'm a believer in Jesus. I struggle with selfishness, fear, and pride. And my name is Julie. And then the whole group welcomes Julie. So teach them that that's how that works and that they'll do that every week. In the introductory week, you will also teach them fully the 8 Zoom guidelines. So you're not just going to read the guidelines on that first week, but you're going to teach them. You're going to give them examples. You're going to give them the reasons why these are important, the reasons why these keep the group safe. The more explanation you do about the guidelines and the more examples you give of how these can be broken or how it might happen or why we keep those, the more explanation you give, the better, because it will lend for them to keep them more easily or understand when they're not keeping them. So you will teach thoroughly those guidelines. during the introductory week. You will also explain things in the group explanations. So you will explain the lesson schedule, how you'll do one lesson every week and kind of give them an idea. You have to be on time, these kinds of things, things about the group that they need to know. What happens when you miss a meeting? We usually tell people that if they've missed 3 meetings in a row, that means that this is not a good time probably for them to do step study. There are too many life interruptions and it's totally okay, but they probably need to start over with a different group that's being held another time. So just kind of give them a heads up that what your policy is, and you'll need to coordinate with your co-leader as to what your policy is regarding missed meetings. And we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end, about how to navigate it when someone misses a meeting. Also, explain to them that there are to be no distractions during step study time. This includes, we're not going to be eating our dinner during step study and have food, all that. You can have one drink or something, but no eating, no wrappers, no kids in the room, all that stuff. And the Zoom guidelines talk about who can be in the room, which is nobody, you. So we want to limit distractions. We also want to have zero politics shared, which is a complete distraction. I even recommend to our leaders that it is a good practice not to communicate any indication as to what party affiliation you are, who you voted for, what your opinions are about things. None of that is important when we are working our recovery, and it actually can be a distraction for people. So to explain to them in advance, there is to be no communication about politics or votes or people or politicians or whatever. None of that during step study. That is your own private space, and we don't want to muddy the waters in our groups with those kinds of topics. That is for another place. And then explain the importance and the dangers of gossip, what that is. We actually have an entire gossip document that we have our people read through, but really you can just tell your CPR participants the dangers of sharing anything that happens in this circle with anyone, and reassure them that everything that they say is protected and it is safe here. That is why you are in a CPR group, because gossip is so prevalent elsewhere, and it makes everything unsafe, especially for you. So explain, and you probably won't have trouble with them understanding that, but reassure them that you will keep their confidence and expect every single person in the group to agree to the same. During the introductory week, you will also share a mini version. We recommend like a mini version, maybe a 5-minute version of your recovery testimony, or maybe you have one written out. You don't have to. Maybe you just want to share a few minutes on why a CPR study has meant so much to you, how has benefited you. And so share a little bit about you, share your struggles. If your participants have no idea who you are and cannot relate to you at all, it will be harder to follow you. And so be transparent in your mini testimony. Share from your heart about your struggles and what the CPR study has helped you overcome, and how it gave you a place of safety where maybe nothing else has. So share your testimony in some form during the CPR introductory week. And then have a time of a get to know you sharing with them. So invite them to practice the guidelines where we listen to everyone. We don't cross talk, we don't interrupt, we use I and me statements, and give them a chance. Maybe you guide them with a specific question like, what are you hoping to gain in this study? Or tell us a little bit about you. 3 to 5 minutes, depending on how much time you have available in the introductory session you're in. So encourage each of them to share about themselves. And then I encourage you to use that time to either correct any guidelines that may have kind of been fuzzy during that little time. Someone's responding to so-and-so or whatever, or remind them of why we do this. And I noticed that some people were saying, how you, and rather than I. So if you were noticing that, then use the end time to remind them of any things you noticed or to praise them on things you noticed, how they did a great job holding the guidelines or whatever. So use that time to remind them, praise them, even in the introductory week when they do that sharing. So that's week 1. And in week 2, you will most likely, so in a regular step study, we have several introductory weeks. We usually have 3 in-person introductory weeks to go through all of that again. But usually in a CPR group in week 2, you will head into lesson 1. So you will follow the meeting elements that we've already talked about and the ministry elements that we've already talked about. Now I want you to pull out your book 2. That we are going to talk about, because book 2 is a little bit different. It's a little bit of a beast sometimes to get through. So I want to highlight, as the leader, how you are going to lead your group through book 2. We call it navigating book 2. So specifically, lesson 7 is about sponsors, and that's a secular term, but we use it in Celebrate Recovery too. And so that they might be unfamiliar with what a sponsor is for them. Maybe they use the word discipler or something like that, but a sponsor for them is really just someone they really trust. Maybe it's someone in ministry they trust. Maybe it's just a best friend that they trust. It needs to be someone that is the same gender as them and not a family member. So they need to be thinking ahead, and you can even tell them this in the introductory week, that in book 2, they will be asked to start looking for a sponsor for that because we need to have safe people to share our things with one-on-one that we're not sharing in the big group. So when you get to lesson 7, lean into that and explain more fully what a sponsor will look like for them. And in lesson 9, I want to highlight that because that is when they will be learning how to do their inventory. What is the inventory process like? So I want you to see the links that I have posted on that Google Doc in the link here. Is the link to, we have a YouTube training. Our church uses a YouTube training that one of our leaders put together for us on how to do an inventory. And so he's got a big whiteboard and he goes through it. And so that lesson 9, during your sharing time, instead, you're going to play that 45-minute video and follow along with what he's doing. And you will also provide your groups with the inventory workbook that goes along with it and the inventory worksheet that goes along with it. So that's a big video day. Make sure everyone's present and can ask questions during that time. You can also send the links to anyone who cannot come that day, but it's best if they can come so they can ask you as the leader any questions that they have about doing an inventory. So lesson 9 is unusual because you won't have any questions to prepare, or they won't have any to prepare for that. And the links to all that is in the Google Doc that's attached. And then lesson 8 of the book 2, there's a lot of questions. That's the moral lesson. And there's a lot of questions in the moral lesson. So it depends on if you have a really full group. We usually don't let groups get over 12 or 15 people. And so if you have that many people, you may not have time to get through all the questions in week 1 or in the week that you're doing the moral lesson. So it's okay for you to split those up and say, we're going to do half the questions this week and half the questions the next week, or just kind of play that by ear. But that lesson might go into 2 weeks. Do not get on and make the class go any longer because you didn't finish the questions. You start on time, you end on time, you honor their time. So keep in mind, for depending on the size of your group, about lesson 8. And the same with lesson 10 and 11. Those are very, very long lessons. Those are the spiritual inventory lessons. And I always, even in small groups, will divide those lessons up into 2 weeks at a minimum. Do half the lesson 1 week and half the lesson another week for both 10 and 11. But if you have more than a smaller group, you probably will have to do 3 weeks or 4 weeks for each of those lessons. So just keep that in mind as you are moving forward into lesson 10 and 11. You'll have to look ahead and plan ahead for which sections they are expected to do before they arrive. So that's what book 2 is. I would also be sure and teach them that their inventories that they are doing, you're teaching them in lesson 9, their inventories will be in addition to the questions that they are doing in their step study. So they are not doing their inventories when they're as they're doing their questions. The inventories are separate. Make sure they understand that, that the worksheet is something that they do outside of class. And they are going to use their answers from lesson 10 and lesson 11 to begin their inventory. So the questions and the answers that they have from lessons 10 and 11 are a great jump start for their inventory. So use that to their advantage. Also, tell them that they are to complete their inventories and share their inventories before the end of book 3. And so we will be talking about it in book 2. But as you continue on, be sure that they finish their inventories and share their inventories with their safe person, their sponsor, before the end of book 3. It is really, really an important part. We don't want to delay that and let that go on and on. And as their leader, you can really help them by following up with them as to the status of their inventories. Now, I usually just maybe one-on-one say, hey, how are you doing? I might call them out one-on-one. Have you shared your inventory? Do you have a date? And some of the questions in the participant guide will kind of lead you into what is your date. But in book 3, those aren't the questions you're having. So I would lean in and make sure you're aware as to who is sharing their inventory, who's already shared it. That is good accountability. That is good accountability for them. It is very tempting to plan to do it and have all the great intentions, and then to just let life get away and busyness happen, and you don't actually do it, or you do most of it or part of it, and then you don't share it because you're never quite ready. Get it on the calendar, share it, and you can do them a huge favor by keeping them accountable and checking in, especially as you get to near the end of book 3, like the second to last lesson. Everyone needs to have shared it by next week, kinds of things. How is that going? Hey, let me know. So great accountability. You can help them as the leader to do that. So that is navigating book 2. So book 3 and 4 are similar to book 1. So that's really the piece about the meetings and the lessons. Now I want to spend a little bit of time before we wrap up about what about this? What happens if? What do I do if this? And so there are sometimes surprises in our groups. And as leaders, we need to be prepared for those surprises. And so one of the questions we answer in our trainings is, how can I prevent issues from arising in a step study? And you know this. We cannot prevent all issues from happening in a step study, but you can do a lot by clearly stating the expectations at the beginning. If you explain at the beginning what the guidelines are for, why they're important, explain how that you expect everyone to write out their answers. And I didn't mention that before, I don't think, but that's one of the things you need to explain for them, is that they need to write out their answers, no ad-libbing, why we do that. And so if you explain that well at the very beginning, then it will be easy to correct it if you need to as you go, and it won't be a surprise to them. Another thing is to deal with issues quickly, especially at the beginning. We want to give grace, I know, but especially at the beginning. It's not a criticism of anyone. We are just leaning in and correcting the guidelines quickly. So if you notice, like on the introductory week or on any future weeks at the beginning, especially if they're not using I and me statements, if they are veering into you statements, you this, you that, and you all this, and you know how you this and whatever. I had someone in a step study do that once. At the end, she was reading her answers and it had all these you about how when you do this and when you do that. And at the end I said, would you mind rereading that with I statements instead? And I just said it just like that. And she went, oh, she didn't even realize that she had done that. And so she read it with the word I. And at the end, it was so personal to her. And she just said, wow, it meant so much more to her that she read it with an I in there, because it applies to me, what God is or what that is to me. So correct that in the moment. Invite them to make that switch. If you have anyone responding to anyone or any crosstalk or anything that's making the group unsafe, just remind everyone not to respond, or remind everyone whatever the issue is at the front. You can prevent a lot of issues down the road by dealing with it early. So what happens if participants do not come prepared with their questions answered? Please set this as a standard at the beginning that everyone is to write their answers and to read only what they have written. So if you set that standard, it will be easier to deal with that. Explain the reasons why we don't just ad lib. But I will say that there are people who love to write and people who don't, people who journal well and people who don't. And so if you are listening to someone who's really struggling to write out complete sentences or write out their full answers, we do highly encourage complete full answers that they just read. Encourage them, they can still participate. It's not a deal breaker, but encourage them to write out words that describe their feelings, words that describe their character issues, as much as they possibly can, with very, very little ad-libbing if they can get away with it. So just be discerning about that. We really want everyone to read what they have written, but that is hard for some people to embrace. So I will say, do not allow anyone in your groups to write any answers down during other people's sharing. That is a kind of a form of crosstalk. It is distracting to the group and distracting to them and not honoring the person who's listening, and they're not prepared. So tell them they are not to write any answers in their guide during the group time. And if they did not have anything prepared for group, that happens sometimes where they just didn't get anything done, most people will not want to come. Encourage them to come. Maybe they want to come and ad lib all their answers. Well, we don't want them doing that. They can participate in the open sharing at the beginning, but they encourage them to listen. A lot of the recovery that we have is us listening to other people sharing. And so it can benefit someone tremendously, even if they're just listening to the answers that someone else gives. It's not an out for them to not do their questions, but definitely encourage someone to come and listen if they don't have their lesson prepared. What happens when someone misses one of the lessons? Someone has to be out. This goes back to connecting. Connect with them. Reach out to them. You've kept an attendance of who came that week. Reach out to them. Remind them how important it is to complete each lesson, especially in the intro week. So tell them you expect them to do their questions even on weeks where they have to be out or can't be there. Encourage them to, maybe there's two people that had to be out. So you encourage them to maybe meet on Zoom or on a phone call or something and go over their answers together. Maybe it's better to have the accountability of them sharing their answers with you. So you might make yourself available for them to just call you or Zoom with you and just share their answers with you. Usually it just takes a few minutes for them to read through it if they're the only one sharing. If I'm doing that, a lot of times I will share my answers with them. They missed the meeting. They didn't get to hear any sharing. So I like to share my answers with them. So there are at least two of us sharing on the Zoom call or the phone call or whatever. So listen to their answers, invite them to share their answers. Don't just say we missed you. And then it's good to keep them accountable to share their answers with someone. So that is the best practice. What happens if someone does not want to share on the question, but instead wants to talk about what's going on in their life that week? Now, that does happen sometimes in step study. Hopefully, it won't happen in the CPR step study because you're actually providing a time for people to share what's going on in their week. But if people are taking question, whatever, number 3, and using it as a time to ad lib about what struggle they're having in their life, that means they probably didn't come prepared if they're ad libbing and didn't have anything written down. So remind them that kind of stuff is good to have during their open time of sharing, and that they can definitely use their life situation as an illustration in their answer if it applies, but their answer needs to be specifically answering that question. So redirect them to the question. Hey, so what did you have on? So tell me your answer on number 3 then, or whatever it was. Hopefully that won't be happening too often, but that's how you redirect if someone is going around the question, not answering the question directly. So how do I address it when a guideline is broken during the meeting? I've touched on that a little bit, but one thing I will tell you is that if it's a bigger infraction and you can kind of judge whether it's bigger or not, it's better to correct in private if possible. It can be difficult to receive criticism, especially if people are sensitive to it in front of everyone, unless it's happened with several people. It's best to correct it in private. Hey, just a reminder, I've noticed that you have a tendency to do this. I just want to remind you that this is best. So redirect them privately. However, do keep in mind that sometimes when someone's breaking a guideline like politics or some other thing that's making the group not quite safe, it's important for you to determine whether this is going to damage the safety of the group if I do not stop it immediately. If I do not address it immediately, and there are those things. And so be sure and not procrastinate addressing it and just say, hey, just a reminder, or maybe you redirect that one person. Hey, we're not going to talk about that this time. Right now, that's for another time. Stop things, redirect in the moment if it's not safe for the group right then. You don't want to wait until private to stop something that was making the whole group unsafe in the moment. So be bold about those things and stop those things, redirect those things. And the last thing I want to touch on, the what if. So what do I do? We talked about 3 meetings in a row. And then if you miss 3 meetings in a row, this isn't a good time. And so that's the language we use when we encourage someone to try step study another time. But what happens if someone's missing like 2 and then they come back for 1 and then they miss 1 and then they come back for 2 and then they've got this intermittent thing, or they don't quite miss 3 in a row, but they're inconsistent in their attendance, or they're missing several meetings throughout, and they just have this general inconsistency that is a little bit pushing the boundary of the rule. And so I will tell you that there's never a clear black and white answer on what to do if someone is generally inconsistent, but it's important for you as the leaders to discern where this person is in their recovery, and reach out to them, connect with, hey, what's going on? Maybe they're traveling a lot, which if they're on Zoom, they should be able to jump on when they're traveling, but approach them with love and grace. And if it is not a good time, an inconsistent pattern of attendance is going to affect their ability to have strong recovery, and it affects the group, the safety of the group somewhat. If they're here and then not here and then here and then not there, it makes the group a little bit less steady. So it might be a good time for them to try a different group, a different time. However, if in your discernment you deem that this person really is engaged, they're really plugged in, they are really invested, they are just having some sort of issue that's keeping them from being as consistent as they want or whatever, and you decide that they still can participate and they can still do that, I would encourage them to make up every lesson that they have missed. And that's a really good way for you to discern whether they're all in or not. When they are missing lessons, are they making them up and going them over with someone already? Or are you having to double check with them all the time and they're not really doing that? If they are willing to make up some missed lessons, then that might be an indication that they can stay in the group. If they haven't been, or that may resolve itself naturally, but that can be a good guidance for you on whether they should continue. So use your discernment as to what situation they may be having, and that will give you good guidance. So I hope I have covered the ministry pieces, the meeting pieces, the book 2 difficult stuff, some of the what ifs. If you have any other questions, like I said, go to CPRpastors.com, and there's a contact us section, and you can go there and ask any questions that you have and connect with someone there. I will tell you as I wrap up, thank you so much for saying yes to leading pastors through the 12 steps of recovery. What I will tell you is that this will absolutely change your life, change their lives. And because so many people are ministered by our pastors, it is going to change the church. So you saying yes to leading pastors in recovery is going to change the church. Thank you for saying yes. God bless you.